The story begins with a young girl came to a carriage that was traveling in an unknown direction. The girl looked around and tried to understand where she was currently. The girl's gaze stopped at the mirror, and so she took him in her hands and looked into her reflection. Yes, what she saw brought her in shock, because she never remembered herself with long brown hair. The last she remembered from her life. She wandered down the street completely broken down with the news that the main character from her favorite game died, and, thinking about it, the girl got under the wheels of the truck. From the thoughts, the girl was swollen Kushar, who reported that soon they should come to the estate of URD, calling the girl Elena. Then the girl realized that it was so called in a new life. The girl immediately realized that she had reborn into her favorite magical game, and judging by her gorgeous carriage and a fairly expensive dress, the girl unambiguously belonged to the aristocrat. But this information was not enough, so Elena asked Kucher to tell in more detail why they were sent to this estate. She really wanted to find out what was waiting for her ahead. Kucher smiled and asked why it was suddenly interested in this issue, because she would become the Duke's wife from today. The shocked girl just blinked her eyes. She could not believe that after her degeneration she had not passed 5 minutes, as she had to marry someone. There was some cold on her back, but still the girl decided to take herself. When Kucher helped the young girl get out of the carriage, she began to look at the well-decorated estate with her mouth open, which reminded her of the castles of fairy tale novels. Kucher said the Duke Robert had probably waited for them, so he suggested that Helen get inside. Now the girl has additional information about her future husband, his name. On the way, the girl could not take her look from the luxurious palace and thought that finally fate smiled and she managed to marry a fairly wealthy man. Elena was glad that she would finally be able to live a rich life and in no way to refuse, unlike in what conditions she lived her previous life. The girl decided that if she had already managed to get into such an incredible place, then she must meet all the characters of her favorite game. Passing the yard, Elena noticed the boy. The boy immediately attracted her gaze, and she decided to approach him closer. He was quite silent and viewed white flowers. But when Elena came closer, she couldn't believe her eyes. Sirius sat in front of her, and he was the most beloved character of this game, from which she was delighted in her previous life. Therefore, Elena did not stay and was in surprise if he really was. The girl thought that even when she was told the name of the family where she was heading, she could not even imagine what she would meet here with her favorite character. This innocent look that the boy looked at the woman unknown to him carried her crazy, and she felt as if she immediately discovered a true legend in her game on her first attempt. The girl thanked the fate that she had reborn in this body and could not believe that she pulled out the fitting ticket in the most important lotteries of her life. Then the girl caught herself thinking that she did not even meet the boy, which she probably scared him. Therefore, Elena immediately greeted her lover, trying to remedy the situation. Suddenly, the girl heard a male voice who said that Elena finally reached their estate and said that the road had passed without much adventure. Elena examined her husband and concluded that it was probably Robert who was to be her husband. The girl pulled her hand timidly and said that fortunately everything went well. Robert replied that he was glad to hear it and, holding Elena's hand, said that he was glad to greet the girl in the URD family and would still count on his wife today. Robert was approached by Sirius, who called the man Dad and asked who the woman was. The Duke stroked his son on his head and said that he will be a member of their family from today. The boy hid behind Daddy and asked if this woman was going to live with them. Robert gently answered his son that it may be unusual at the beginning, but he hopes they would find common ground. Elena thought about herself that Sirius's father is quite sweet and noted that it was not surprising because God himself could give birth to her beloved Sirius. The girl thanked it aloud for his care. Now the girl has finally realized that she died in a car crash and reborn in the world of her favorite mobile game, taking the place of Sirius's stepmother. But then it came to the girl that Elena was still a treacherous thief in the game who specifically married the head of the Urdi family, and then mercilessly killed him to take possession of the authorities in the duchy. From this, the girl was in despair, because she could not believe that she had reborn into the body of a woman who destroyed the life of her beloved character, and now she would have to endure all this. Meanwhile, somewhere in the estate of the family, Ignisa, a man smashed a glass in a photo with the image of Robert and Elena, saying in despair that he himself has a fake mask from a thief who checked Robert. Fantastic Magic is a mobile game development game whose actions unfold in the Magic Academy. Of all the 20 heroes of this game, Sirius Urdo became the beloved girl. In the past life, the girl was named Ochai Akari. She worked in the morning by night, an office worker, and constantly received reprimand from a manager who forced her to work a girl overtime. Returning home in local transport, the girl saw an advertisement about a magical mobile telephone game. It referred to the beauties from the Magic Academy, and Ochai became interested in this game. Although the girl was too busy to spend her time in mobile games, but a young man with an unusual attractive appearance and hair color with a purple tint was very interested in Ochai. Sirius's gaze was constantly in front of the girl's eyes, and she still downloaded this game on a mobile phone. At first, she played simply out of curiosity, but did not have time to make her way, as she completely plunged into the game. Igor's world was saturated with different events, but usually remained a common story about the weekdays of the Magical Academy, where Sirius became her favorite character. However, the day came that dispelled their weekdays. It was a day when demonic beasts broke into the academy. Since then, the development of events in the game has become unpredictable and incredibly interesting. The academy itself prepared magicians that could fight magic beasts. Also within the walls of the academy, a training examination was held, and the murder of a demonic beast was a mandatory part. The incident happened during this part of the exam, and in the arena, which should be a safe city, a high-level demonic beasts broke into. Many of the students were in deadly danger. Then Sirius, with other students of the Magical Academy to protect the weaker students, challenged a magical beast and created a detachment to save the academy. However, after the squeal, Sirius could no longer control his forces, and the raging magic threw him into darkness. He lost control of the magical forces that made him a real demon. Sirius began to attack everyone who happened in his way without parsing and ruthless to kill them. There was nothing left for the students except to tie Sirius and kill him. It was at this point that, without taking her eyes off the phone, the girl was so stunned that she did not even pay attention to the traffic lights and went forward across the road. A few minutes later, the girl was knocked down by a truck that was traveling at high speed. But in the last seconds of Ochai's life, she thought of Sirius and his unfair death. The girl prayed in her sleep so that it was only a nightmare and Sirius remained alive, because she could not put up with the idea that her pet was no longer in the game. At this time, a maid came into the room. The maid noticed that he was probably a nightmare, because in her eyes there were tears. But the girl in her dream saw the last moment before the death of Sirius and therefore did not restrain her emotions. Elena did not want to talk about her dream, so she told the maid that she probably got to her eye some dust, and embarrassed, the maid rushed behind the water and towel to help the lady. Left alone, the girl said that the cause of Sirius's immersion in darkness was unknown. In the original story, this was explained by the fact that the magical power of the boy came out of control. But the game said that before this event, the boy had a lifetime before his eyes, and maybe because of bad memories, he succumbed to darkness without coping with magical power. The mother left Sirius when he was still small, and his father was killed by his father. The guy had to live with a stepmother who dreamed of taking away everything from Sirius. And while Elena was thinking about Sirius's horrible life, a maid Lilia came to the room who brought a bowl of water and apologized for a long waiting. Elena thanked for his care. The maid said that the breakfast will be ready in a few minutes, so she suggested that Helen help prepare her for exit. The girl gladly agreed and was soon ready for the exit. Stripping the corridor, Elena tried to get used to her new life, and especially to the role in which she was in the coincidence. On the way, she saw a butterfold who held Sirius's hand. Elena rejoiced and waved her hand with her little boy, but the boy was so frightened that he hid behind a butcher. Then the man politely suggested that the young gentleman say hello to Elena. Elena did not turn her eyes off the little boy and tears in her eyes again, because she could not believe that fate allowed her to see her idol. When Sirius died on the plot of the game, the girl seemed to lose the only ray of light in her life. People even laughed at her because of too strong fixation on a regular character. It was Sirius who gave the girl those colors that were not enough in her life, but she was broken because she was reborn by Elena, a stepmother who destroyed the boy's life. In general, the bad Sirius's memories were associated with his father's new marriage. But right now, Robert was alive, and Sirius had a stable mental state, so Elena decided that she had a chance to change his fate. The girl decided that if the heart of Sirius was not filled with pain, then he would not be tired, and she only had to make the boy truly happy. Elena decided that she will become the best stepmother for Sirius and will save his life. And to begin with, the girl had to get closer to a little boy. But only Elena tried to talk to a little boy, he immediately escaped. Even when she met him on the street and tried to talk about flowers, Sirius still answered nothing. Elena no longer knew what to do to win the little boy's trust. She tried almost everything, and Sirius continued to remain silent and constantly avoided meetings with her. When they had breakfast with the boy once, Elena did not leave her attempts and said aloud that today a delicious breakfast, asking Sirius his opinion on this occasion. The boy continued to eat silently. Then Elena mentally noted that she was not going to give up and asked in Sirius what his favorite dish. Hearing this, the boy put the cutlery and said he had already ate, and then he quickly got out of the table and left the dining room, leaving Elena alone. Elena said that Sirius was constantly avoiding her and could not understand that she was doing wrong. Meanwhile, the maid noted that the lady looks not very much and asked if she was fine with her. The maid was called Lilia Bianca, and on the eve of Elena's marriage and Robert she entered the duchy. The girl was still too young and inexperienced, so she often made senseless mistakes. Lilia said that Elena was cold because the maid brought too cold water in the morning. The butterflies, when he heard it, noted that he asked the maid to heat the water to the temperature of the human body. The Bogretsky was called the Odysseus, and he was also the right hand of Mr. Robert, a good but very responsible man when it was about work. When Elena saw Lily reading Lily, she immediately remembered how in her past life the boss constantly shouted at her and she was not on her own, so Elena hurried to say that she was just frozen. The butter seemed to read her thoughts and asked if Miss Elena's behavior of Sirius was concerned. Then the girl exhaled and sincerely answered that she had the impression that the boy was constantly avoiding her. Elena lowered her head and said that Sirius was probably just hated, but unexpectedly heard the voice of Robert, who said it was wrong, because Elena recently began to live here and Sirius was not accustomed to her. Robert began to explain that his son is a rather shy boy, but Elena's attention was turned over by a man who was near Robert and simply drilled her with her views. It was a fairly tall young man with dark hair and yellow eyes that did not look at a young girl. Judging by his clothes, it was possible to conclude that he is quite wealthy. Therefore, Elena asked that she was a husband, and Robert carefully reminded his wife that he had already introduced them. The girl smiled and replied that she had a bad memory on her face, so she could not remember. Robert replied that this is not surprising, because his best friend was constantly in a hurry and they saw only one moment. Alexandra briefly replied that he had such a job and you won't do anything with it. Robert added that Alexander was his best friend from academic times, and Elena could not remember who he was playing in the game this Alexander, although his face was quite familiar to her. The girl immediately sat in a bow and greeted with a young man, asking for apology that she did not recognize him from the first time, and he continued to look at her evaluating look. Robert said that, returning to the conversation, the deer should not be hung up on Sirius because the problem will be solved by itself after a while. Elena replied that she would use his advice. Alexander, who dissatisfied with his friend, went into their conversation that Robert probably hurried with his second marriage and his son is possible simply psychologically not ready for life with stepmother. But Robert politely said that he made such a decision, taking care of Sirius, and believes that it will be useful for his son because the boy lacks maternal care. Alexander said it was a misconception. Robert immediately parried, saying that he had to become a father first and then understand these problems. Elena, watching the men, smiled quietly. A girl thought about herself that looking at the dispute of these men, you immediately understand what a friendly relationship between them. And then she unexpectedly remembered an important episode from the game. The girl remembered that one day a friend wanted to reconcile with Sirius and prepared his favorite cherry pie for him. Then Elena approached Robert and asked if she could use the kitchen. Robert said that if she wanted, and without waiting for the answer, Elena ran into the kitchen in a moment, calling Lily with her. The man smiled and said aloud that he had not noticed what she was sweet. Alexander saw a look at Elena, his friend, so he asked him not to lose his vigilance, because he himself knows who this woman really knows. Meanwhile, when wearing an apron, Elena managed in the kitchen and was already waiting for a cherry pie from the oven. Sprinkling with powdered sugar, Elena acknowledged that this dish looked unmatched. The maid covered Elena with compliments, saying that she never had to see such a perfect pie in her life, so she did not even know what her lady talented. On the birthday of Sirius in the past life, the girl has already baked his favorite dish. Therefore, this skill was very much needed here, and she was pleased that she had everything. Elena decided that she was left behind, to find Sirius, and she immediately went in search of a boy. Only the girl came out of the table as she faced Sirius in the hallway. The boy, as soon as he saw the stepmother, turned 180 degrees and decided to run already. But Elena shouted Sirius to wait, because she had prepared a cherry pie specifically for him. Hearing that the case concerns the cherry pie, the boy returned to Elena. He asked whether he had heard about this dessert, and the girl mentally noted that she had to attract his attention. Sirius went with the stepmother to the table room because her offer was very tempting. When he settled on a chair, Elena stretched him the best piece of cherry pie and offered to try. The boy took a piece of cake and tasted it. After that, a smile appeared on his face, and Elena mentally noted that she had just seen the smile of God himself. Elena was in the seventh heaven with happiness, because even in her dreams she could not imagine that she would see it in reality. The girl did not take the axis from a boy who gladly tasted her flavors. The girl's beloved character was sitting opposite her and enjoying her cake. It was something unrealistic, so Elena did not look at her until the plate was completely empty in front of Sirius. That evening, Duke Robert gathered for business. There have been a lot in recent days, so he had to leave for a while to decide some of them. William, as always, was near his owner. Robert, in no hurry, told about the plan of affairs for the coming days, and the Bogretsky said that they would do everything regarding his orders. Finally, the Duke asked the William to look after everything. Elena decided not to be too intrusive, and after treating the boys' goodies, she decided to wait a little and carefully approached Sirius in the hallway. At the door, Elena greeted with Sirius and expected the boy, as always, to silently slide behind the door. But Sirius stopped and wished a good morning to his stepmother in response. Elena clasped in her palm, hearing it. She thought that her plan with her favorite cake worked, and now only had to make friends with the boy and do her best to trust her. The girl decided that it was time to find some more common interests, and seeing the boy in the boy's hands, recalled that these gypsum is his beloved, so she asked Sirius about them. The boy threw his head and confirmed that this is how these white flowers are called. Then Elena cheerfully asked where Sirius took them and whether they were growing in the Duke's garden. Sirius said that these flowers remind him of the Milky Way, and then the girl noted that it was a good comparison and suggested to snatch a few more flowers to decorate with their room. The boy agreed to help Elena to collect a bouquet of gypsum, and she was happy that for the first time in her stay in the estate of Urdi, she had a full conversation with Sirix. So Elena at Joy suggested not to delay and immediately go to the garden to collect a beautiful bouquet. On that day, the girl was the happiest in the world, because it was no better to imagine. They cheerfully traveled the corridor to the Dusical garden. Elena did not even pay attention to the fact that at the end of the corridor stands Robert, who does not bring her eyes from her new wife and son. And when Elena and Sirius came out of the estate, Robert looked at them for a long time and thought about himself that he should not worry about his son for his future fate. Elena admired a boy who was sitting among white flowers and very regretted that she had no smartphone here, because the whole gallery would be in these amazing photos. The girl could not look away from this beauty and noticed that Sirius belonged to these flowers with special attention, so she asked the boy. Then the boy frankly told his stepmother that Dad told him that gypsum was the favorite flowers of his mother. Talking about such personal memories in the eyes of Sirius, tears made. Elena decided to support the boy, and gently said that apparently these flowers retain the boy's memory of a special person, so it is not surprising that he was treated with such a trembling. After a frank conversation with Sirius, Elena appeared some questions for her husband, so the girl went to Robert's office. Having knocked on the door, the girl said she needed to talk. Opening the Duke's door was very surprised, because he did not expect to see his wife here. Robert asked what happened because he thought that Elena could come to him only in an extraordinary case. But Elena calmly replied that nothing special happened, and she wanted to discuss some issues with her husband. The surprised Robert replied to go to the office. The girl began to go inside and drew attention to the eyes of a man who was surprisingly red. Elena decided not to remain silent and asked the Duke that with his eyes. Elena guessed that he probably works at night so she could sleep well. Aloud, the girl asked Robert not to bring herself to exhaustion and be careful about her health. Robert thanked for his care and said Elena did not worry about his health and suggested that the girl sit down. When his wife was comfortable on his chair, the Duke asked what she wanted to talk about. The girl said she wanted to make sure to Sirius and she needed the Duke's help. He smiled and replied that because of the hyperopic of Robert himself, the boy behaved with other people very carefully. Robert thanked his wife that she took the initiative in this matter and turned to him for help. Then Elena unexpectedly asked why his wife died, apologizing to the question. Then the Duke said that the sealings of childbirth were very difficult, and immediately after the birth of Sirius she died. Robert gave his son to save his life because the baby was barely breathing. The girl remembered this exclusive story from the life of Sirius, which was told only in the extra version of the mobile game, in which Sirius performed the main character. Elena, of course, noticed what efforts she was worth sharing such an intimate story with another person, so she appreciated it. The girl wondered if Sirius himself knew this story. The Duke dropped his gaze and said that he would tell his son as soon as he grew up, and added that only the chosen from his environment know this story about the birth of Sirius. Then Robert looked at Elena and said he was asking and keeping this story secret. The girl, of course, promised that everything will remain between them, and she understands the importance of this information. The Duke's mood changed for the better, and he praised Elena for her insight, because she guessed that the cherry pie, Sirius's favorite dish, and asked how she succeeded. Elena explained that she just heard an excerpt of the conversation of Cook, where he spoke of a cherry pie. The Duke reported that the son was extremely rejoiced in such a delicacy, and added that his son would be safe with Elena. A few days later, the girl stood by the window and looked outside. For a consecutive day, Leven was pouring, and they did not even go out with Sirius to the street. Elena said that they planned to gather oranges in the garden today, and because of their plans, they were not destined to put into practice. Suddenly, near the window was struck by lightning. Elena was frightened and went away because it was at this time with lightning that thunder thundered. When it subsided a little, she went to the window again and looked outside. Then Elena unexpectedly remembered that Sirius was also afraid of lightning and ran to the boy to support him, because it was at this time that Duke Robert left the estate for a few days. Elena ran that there was strength, hurrying to Sirius, and her heart seemed to have suggested that she now needed her support. An unexpected corridor flew a crying Lily, which shouted loudly that had happened. Elena became like Kopana and tried to find out in the maid, but Lilia only sobbed and repeated the word Duke, Duke. Then the girl decided to go to the room to Robert. The fact that she saw almost torn her heart. The poor boy was crying over his late father, who was all wrapped in bandages and tried to do everything so that only his father came to life again. Also in the room was a butterfly and a maid Lily, who did not hold back their tears, because they could not believe what happened in their Duke. For Elena, everything was in a terrible dream. The stunned news that the Duke tragically died a girlfriend and she could not gather thoughts in the heap because she did not understand how it happened and why he was no longer alive. The boy was crying and asking for his father to woke up and stroked him on his head, as always. He pleaded for his father to get out of bed and said that he just sacrificed because he did not believe in this terrible reality. The Duchessy told the Duchess of Elena that Robert had returned from the imperial palace to the duchy in a carriage that lost his control and fell from the rock. Robert died instantly. Listening to this creepy history, only one thought flashed in Elena's head. Is it possible to save Sirius now if the Duke was still killed and history has become inevitable? The idea that fate could not be changed so shocking that Elena lost consciousness for a moment and began to fall. The butterflies growing it, and asked if everything was well with it. The girl apologized, explaining that her head was turning from this horror. Then the Batursky said that they were taking care of Sirius and advised her to go to the room. Elena could not look away from a boy who was killed over his late father and thought that she was appreciating the concern of the Boylian, but she could not throw Sirius at such a serious moment. The girl reassured herself and ordered herself to take her hands, because it is not necessary to think about her own state of health, because the only one who is now the most painful is a little boy who lost his father. Elena decided that she should act as her parents would come in this situation, and having come up with a lot, thought that she did not even know what to say to reassure the little one. Then the girl decided that the words may be superfluous, so she took the boy by her hand and looked into his eyes. Elena wanted to be just next to Sirius at this terrible moment of his life. The boy seemed to be rushed from the terrible dream and looked into the eyes of his stepmother. He did not take his hand, believing that this woman wanted to support him sincerely. So they stood, holding hands near the late Duke. They felt that they supported each other, and from this on the soul of Elena became more comfortable and calm. The girl said that tomorrow the funeral of Duke Robert had to take place, and she decided to check the circle of Elena's communication to find out more about her life. She worried that close friends of the Duke would gather in this event, and she may not know the name of any of them, as it happened to his best friend, Alexander, which is why he was so angry with her. The girl began to look all the cabinets in her room and noticed a box. She was locked up, and Elena recalled that she was lying in her handbag, so she decided to try whether she would not fit the castle. Surprisingly, the box opened quickly, and the girl got a notebook from her, which made notes from the day Elena met the Duke Robert. But what she read there, she let her in shock. The Elena's notebook was planned in advance and described in detail the attempt on the life of the Duke of Robert. And it was on the day of the funeral that she reflected on this information. From the notebook, the girl learned about the routes of the Duke's carriage, the name of the killer, and other details of the crime. She was reborn into Elena, the wife of the Duke of Urdor, and did not even suspect that the murder was already planned. Long before the girl's moving to the duchy, the real Elena had already taken care of the murder of Robert, and without the knowledge of the girl herself was put into practice, which was why the Duke was tragically died. It is easier to say that the murder of the Duke was guilty of Elena, and she did not know how to confess to this Sirius, for whom Robert was the only native man and in this world. But Elena decided not to draw early conclusions because she could not say with certainty whether the Duke's death was a casual accident, whether a professional killer was working here. Therefore, the girl decided to begin to check everything and find out the truth, and then think how to confess to the poor boy in everything. And this is the issue that Elena decided to do as soon as possible. As soon as the occasion, Elena immediately decided to visit the base of a hired killer called X. Of course, going to the killer was very scary, but she was sure that the killer would not attack his customer. Suddenly, the girl heard a male voice behind who said they had not seen a lady for a long time and asked what he could be useful. Elena turned and saw a tall man with a scar on her face. Elena decided that this is probably a hired killer, so she needs to behave as if she were a real customer. Lacking her hands in the sides, the girl proudly lifted her face and looked boldly into his eyes. Elena said she came to him to confirm her order and waited for a response from a man who was slowly smoking a cigarette. At first, the man was surprised to ask her question, and then asked, unless her order was postponed because the lady did not have enough money for its implementation. Then the man asked if the girl had no extra money after their last conversation, and Elena came to Elena that she never hired this killer because of the lack of acclaimed work. The man added that even if she had the money, he heard that the Duke of Urda was finishing, and asked if she still found a professional cheaper whether the Duke went to the devil on his own. Going from the hired killer, the girl exhaled with relief, making sure that real Elena could not hire a killer because of a lack of money. Elena cherished that the death of Duke Robert was accidental and decided to return home as soon as possible. The girl went so quickly that she did not notice how someone followed her. After falling on the bed, Elena said that she finally managed to find out the most important thing. It was that Elena was not related to Duke Robert's death, and therefore the chance to change the fate still remained. Reflecting that Robert's death was only an accident, Elena did not notice how a maid came into the room. Lilia apologized for the invasion and reported that Elena had a guest. The girl thought all the way to greet who could come to her, and when she came inside, did not believe her eyes, because on the couch sat the best friend of Robert, Alexander. Elena took herself, leaned the bow and apologized for the expectation, asking what she had done such a respectable guest to her in the estate today. Alexander immediately reported that he had a case about Robert. Alexander said that Robert had an incredible magical talent and managed to raise his family to the Duke's rank for several years. Alexander said that the Duke had a lot of envious, but because of the greatness of his strength and influential position, no one dared to go against Robert. But everything has changed when the Duke of URD died. Alexander noted that now, when the head of the family is dead, there is a high likelihood that other members of his family will be a target for the enemies of Duke Robert. And then summarizing all of the above, Alexander said confidently that he proposes his defense of the Duchess of Helen and Sirius because he cannot leave his best friend's family in a bridge. Shocked, Elena looked at Alexander and said that it was absolutely nothing, because the Duke's disposal has a detachment of knights who are taking care of their safety, so he does not need to go to such measures. But the man was not going to deviate from his idea. He, looking into Elena's eyes, seriously asked what would happen when the URD family heirs would not come not by ordinary knights but magicians. This question made Elena think. While she was thinking, Alexander applied her magical power. He assured the girl that he could deal with any threat. The girl began to think that she did not even think of such a danger that could come from people with magical abilities, because she had no opportunity to protect Sirius from such a threat. Thinking a little, Elena told Alexander that she would be pleased to take advantage of his proposal. In the meantime, the man thought that this cunning woman lost her vigilance. After all, Alexander followed Elena Crown for several days in a row. He saw she communicated with a hired killer on the basis of X a few hours ago. Alexander was convinced that it was Elena who ordered the murder of his best friend, but only that Robert's wife visited the hired killer did not prove her involvement in the Duke's death. The man needed more significant evidence of the Duchess's crime. So to prove the guilt of Elena, Alexander hired the best investigators and began a personal investigation into the death of Duke of Urda. To monitor the suspect better, Alexander decided to offer her his defense. But the fact that she so quickly agreed made him think even more. Alexander decided that Elena agreed only to avoid suspicion, but he was convinced that he seized this stupid woman through the honor of the deceased friend to bring her to clean water. From that day, Alexander remained in the estate of the Duke of Urda, although Elena thought that Alexander would sometimes visit them. Still, the girl had to accept the help of a strong magician for the sake of Sirius. Sitting once at breakfast, Alexander made a little boy that he eats too little and threatened that Sirius would not grow if he continues in the same spirit. After such a sharp remark, Elena looked so threateningly at Alexander that he did not. The girl immediately thought that it was not easy for the boy after the death of his father, so this uneducated slammed his eyes. Feeling by Elena's unpleasant look, Alexander thought that she would not have to leave him. Suddenly, Sirius put cutlery, and saying that he had already eaten, ran out of the dining room. Without saying anything, Elena ran for the boy. Alexander, when he was left alone, thought that he was uncontrollably gave his emotions directly to the child, which was why he felt uncomfortable. Elena caught up with the boy already on the street and asked if Sirius was scared by Alexander. She immediately apologized for not stopping the arrogant friend of Duke Urda. The girl noted that today it is surprisingly good the weather, and asked the boy if he did not want to do something on the street, if the circumstances had already happened and they were here. Sirius lowered his head and, blushing, said that he wanted to gather oranges because they never put their plans into life when they agreed on the last time. Elena was almost stuck that the boy remembered his promise and decided to spend time with her. Therefore, she happily agreed to spend the whole day in the open air, collecting oranges. It has been a long time since Elena and Sirius could have spent so carelessly together, and for the girl such proximity cost tremendous effort and hard work. Elena realized that Sirius had only her loved ones, so the girl aimed at maintaining the carefree smile of this little boy. When Sirius filed another orange, Elena said he was so big that he could cook jam. The boy looked at the stepmother in surprise and explained that it was a sweet and sour mass that was smeared on bread. Suddenly, the Duchess was called by a butterfish, who said that she probably had not yet departed from the Duke's death, and he would like to discuss the future of a young gentleman with Elena. William noted that Sirius will become the next head of the family, only he is too young and is not ready to manage his family. Bogretsky suggested that his services temporary take on the duties of the duchy head. Dvoretsky noted that it will be until Sirius is ready to take this role and asked Elena's thoughts. The girl agreed and asked William to take care of the duchy. Then Elena, looking at the butter, said that she had one request for him, and when William asked what exactly, the girl reported that he knew absolutely nothing about what the Erdard family was doing. She kindly asked the butterfly to tell you as much as possible about this family, which she has become a member of recently. The Bogretsky gladly agreed to fulfill her request. For a long time, their empire suffered from the attacks of demonic animals, and many people, becoming victims of attacks of these animals, were either killed or seriously injured. Robert at the time was the best student of the Magical Academy, and his strength and knowledge allowed him to do a heroic feat. The young man managed to seal these demonic monsters. The emperor presented the title and the earth as a ward. Although this land was not fertile, Mr. Robert filled it with magic and soon rebuilt the whole city. Built a city on a desert land, Urdo won the trust of the emperor, and his glory spread so quickly through the empire that there was no nobleman who would not know the name of Urd. Elena listened to this story with her mouth open and acknowledged that Robert was not only a talented magician who was skillfully sealed by demonic animals, but also a talented ruler. Robert enjoyed the trust and sympathy of the city residents. But after his death, the city began to spread the mood, and the main task was now to show the residents that they had nothing to fear. Dvoretsky reported that in a few weeks there will be an appointment in the imperial palace where young Mr. Sirius will be declared the new head of the URDD family. William noted that it was necessary to prepare Sirius for this event and added that although the title will be issued to the boy, but Elena does not have to tune in the family's reputation before the emperor. Elena, of course, understood what was hinting at the butterfly and replied that she would carefully follow all the instructions of William. The girl decided that she could not fall face in the swamp in front of the emperor. From that day, preparation for the aristocratic event in the imperial palace began. After the first lesson, Elena realized that it was much more complicated than it seemed to her at the beginning. In order to have the perfect posture, the girl had to walk in a lush dress and heels, holding a stack of books on her head. But during the first workout, she did not cope with the task and fell on the floor. The butterfly, who was constantly near the Duchess, immediately rushed to her and asked if everything was well with her. Getting out of the books, Elena sincerely replied that he was not quite. William led his hand to the Duchess and suggested that today take a break until tomorrow. But Elena was in a hurry to assure that she was well and asked what plans are at the butterfly. William replied that he should deal with the documentation, because in recent days it has been collected a lot. Elena asked to visit the Duke's office with him, saying that he would not interfere with him. The butterfly did not deny, but noted that the Duchess should rest. But Elena assured her husband that her strength and energy would have enough of them, so she confidently went with William. Sirius, who hid behind the column in the hallway, was quietly watching the conversation of Helen and Bogretsky. Walking past, Lilia saw a little boy and asked him what he was doing here. Sirius was frightened by the unexpected question, and when he returned, the maid noticed that he was holding an orange. She suggested that the boy clean him from the peel. Sirius immediately said that he was not needed. Then Lilia thought that the boy was probably not going to eat it, and suddenly noticed how part of the orange began to rot. The maid told the boy about it, warning that it is dangerous to eat such an orange because he is at risk of poisoning. And Sirius looked at his precious thing with tears in his eyes. In the Duke's office, Elena saw that the whole table was littered with papers and thought that the Noyoretsky, who was engaged in etiquette lessons with her, had no time for these cases and offered him her help. But the Butursky so skillfully came to work that the girl decided to better not interfere and read something from the books. With degeneration into the body of Elena, she was able to write and read in the language of the empire. Elena asked the Boretsky permission if she could read something, and he replied that, of course. Then the girl decided to get acquainted with the birth of magical business and took a book on history. But Elena did not have time to read the first page, as Bogretsky replied that he had handled all the cases and could proceed with the lessons. The girl was surprised that William was so skilled. Elena suggested that the butler continue her studies after lunch because she wanted to ventilate her head and take a walk. The girl looked out the window and then quickly turned around and ran away from the room. The butler shouted, asking where she ran so much. But Elena no longer heard his words because she saw through the window as Sirius climbed high on the orange tree and stretched to the highest branch with oranges. He remained a little bit and he was reaching for power, and suddenly he came and flew down from the tree, having had to take with him the greatest orange. Sirius was not a joke frightened and flying down. Elena, meanwhile, was already nearby and, stretching her hands, flew to him. She ran so quickly that she lost her shoes on the road, but did not pay attention to it. Somehow, miraculously, when the boy remained a couple of steps, Sirius fell right on his arms to Elena, and she managed to put him safe to the ground safely. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest, taking care of the boy. With tears in the eyes of Elena told Sirius that she saw him through the window and asked why he climbed a tree, because it was quite dangerous, and if she did not have time, he could hurt himself when falling. The boy asked for an apology and explained that he wanted to disrupt another orange, because the one from which they were going to cook jam began to rot, and he worried that they would not work to prepare this dish. Elena asked in surprise whether he wanted to disrupt a new orange and put it up very much that she didn't even think that the boy just wanted to try that orange jam. She understood that although they put off the preparation of jam because of her preparation for the imperial ball, the boy did not forget about it and waited for Elena to cook the jam. Elena wished him happiness, and it was at such moments that she had to be near him as his parents. So she confidently said that they should go to the kitchen immediately and prepare the most delicious jam in history. Sirius, of course, called to help Helen and jumped happily next to her. Already in the kitchen, she wore an apron on the boy and also suggested to participate in the preparation of an orange jam. The boy enthusiastically undertook any job, and Elena entrusted the boy to clean the oranges and help her cut. Sirius was so happy that Elena never saw him. When jam was ready, Elena suggested that he bake even delicious buns to taste the jam, and they started to mix the dough together. Elena and Sirius were constantly joked and wiped out of each other's face, which was smeared with the whole face. Very soon, the girl pulled the scented bun from the oven and they went to taste them together. The boy constantly said that he had never tasted a more delicious jam. For Elena to see Sirius so happy and satisfied, it was like a balm on the heart. Late in the evening, sitting in bed, Elena recalled that tomorrow she was waiting for her all the day of important etiquette lessons, and she did not have time to prepare anything because she spent all day with Sirius. But the girl did not regret her choice, so she decided that she had all the night ahead and, taking a bunch of books, got at the table to prepare for tomorrow's lessons. Meanwhile, Alexander was watching her, who was thinking why she tries to look better than she really is. He remembered how he used the wind this day to soften the fall of Sirius. Of course, the girl was so excited that Alexander did not notice the presence of Alexander. In the meantime, he thought why she worried about Sirius's life, because it would be more logical to get rid of him. Alexander did not understand what this woman wanted, and suspected that she just wanted to seem a caring mom in public to assign all daddy and manage the URD family secretly. The man remembered how 6 months ago the best friend Robert introduced him to a girl named Elena Crown. Alexander, examining the future duchess, immediately suspected something unclean. The green eyes of the beauty of predatory shone, and her treacherous smile made Alexander alert and ask Robert why he thought of marrying a second time. Robert's message that he decided to marry Elena brought Alexander to a shock state. But the friend asked to keep their union secret, as before the marriage was still far away. Alexander asked Robert in surprise why he invited him to him. The Duke reported that he wanted to introduce him to his future wife. Meanwhile, the girl leaned in the bow and introduced. Carefully considering Robert's future wife, Alexander thought that he had never heard the name of Crown, and decided that she probably from the family of not very famous origin. Alexander tried to find out why Robert decided to marry and asked if these were not any political circumstances or something. Robert assured that they met Elena at the ball and fell in love with each other at first sight. Of course, Alexander had nothing against Robert's happiness, because his wife died 4 years ago and it would be normal to fall in love, but this Elena on her face was written that she just wanted to use the Duke. A widower with a young child and also the Duke, it was a good target for the delicious women. And Alexander was convinced that the lone Robert was simply pulled up his head about love for the grave. But Alexander's skin felt such women as Elena. They looked like a hyena who circled around Lasha prey and tried to bite the best piece of thinking only about themselves. Alexander was unpleasant to be Elena's society, so he apologized and said he remembered urgent cases. A man thought that he needed to study Crown family in more detail. Robert was upset and asked why Alexander decided to leave their society so urgently. Alexander insisted that urgent affairs could not wait and headed to the exit. A stretched smile appeared on Elena's face, and the girl said that she understands how much Alexander was concerned, so finally, she said the hope of talking next. Alexander quickly came out of the estate and coiled to the carriage. On the way, he saw that an old leather notebook was lying under the bench, and lifting it, decided to see who he belonged. He revealed the first page and read the notes, which stated that life was over and now all power and money will only belong to her, and she will reach his own, even if he has to kill the Duke. Reading this, Alexander has a cold sweat on his back. Suddenly, he heard the voice of Elena, who caught up with him. Alexander noted that he did not need to accompany him, and the girl did not want to. Elena's upset asked Alexander whether he found one thing here. Man. Demonstratively lifting the notepad Elena, he asked if she was referring to. When Elena saw her notebook in Alexander's hands, she began to be nervous and asked if he opened it. Then the man asked, except in the notepad, there were records that he should not read. Elena boldly came to her husband and forcefully took her notepad from his hands, and then she smiled and said that there was nothing important in it, and there are only all kinds of fantasy stories. It was at this point that Alexander saw the whole essence of Elena Crown, and he became scared of his friend, who so inadvertently decided to marry her. Now Alexander was thinking that he should not give the Notebook of Deer and put his family investigations into the background through other urgent cases, and maybe the Duke would remain alive. Then the man noticed that Elena had fallen asleep and decided to leave. On the way, he thought that the girl was sitting in a cool room in one shirt and decided to return to cover her with a blanket. Alexander justified his act by the fact that if it is cold, the investigation would be able to delay. Elena, meanwhile, relaxed so much that she almost fell on the table, and he had automatically holding it. The man mentally swore that he contacted this fool. In the meantime, she grabbed his hand and, hugging, said that Sirius is not alone now, and he should not worry about himself. After scratching, Alexander immediately took his hand and thought that Elena did not look like the insidious woman from whom he saw the last time. He was still surprised that even in her dream she thought of Sirius. Alexander coded the room, thinking that he was already confused in his conclusions about Elena, and promised himself as soon as possible to understand it. The next morning, the family was walking up to the estate of the family, holding the little boy's hand. The father recalled Lucius that they had previously agreed that he politely behaved with Sirius. In the morning, Elena decided to immediately warn the boy that she had a whole bunch of urgent affairs today, so she forced to promise Sirius to behave in his absence as carefully as possible. Sirius smiled and wished Elena good luck today. Inspired by the fact that her pet is supported by her, the girl coded lessons full of enthusiasm and determination. On the way, Elena reflected that she woke up with a blanket and thought that she probably covered her butter. She was so tired yesterday that she didn't even remember how she fell asleep. Suddenly, Elena met Alexander and asked why he woke up so late today, assuming that probably someone did not let him sleep. Alexander was annoyed that he did not sleep because of her. They did not have time to agree on how a nervous maid flew and reported that a guest had arrived at the estates of the URD. And when Elena tried to find out who, Lilia said that this guest came to Mr. Alexander. A fairly tall man with a brown hair has come to the living room and greeted Alexander, asking how he feels. A fair-haired boy was standing near him. Alexander asked his brother why he decided to visit him, and he explained. They did not see themselves for a long time, and at the same time wanted to walk Luzu. The boy immediately ran to his uncle and hugged Alexander. The brother explained that he wanted to come himself, because only Lucius heard that he was sending to Alexander, then the stick to him, and he could no longer disassemble him. The boy, meanwhile, was waiting for his turn to talk. And as soon as the father fell silent, Lucius Cheerful told Alexander that he could also start using magic soon, and noted that he would become the strongest magician of the empire. Elena knew that Lucius was the best friend of Sirius and his roommate. Therefore, she was glad that she had the opportunity to see not only the childhood of a pet, but also his best friend. The father approached his son and asked him to break away from his uncle, because he needed to discuss with his brother some important questions and advised the boy to play better with Sirius. Lucia, of course, wanted to tell her uncle something else, but he did not come to argue with his father. So he grabbed Sirius by the hand and pulled outside, constantly adjusting the slow boy. The man met with Elena and apologized that he had not introduced himself, explaining that he was the eldest brother of Alex, Roland. Elena called her name in response and thanked her younger brother for his support. Roland politely explained Elena that he would like to discuss something with Alexander alone, and asked if Elena would not be abducted if he stole his brother for a while. The girl replied that of course he would not mind. Deer very much wanted to look at the children, but Lilia reminded that the nozzle was already waiting for her, and assured that she would be kept watching the children when Elena would be occupied by lessons. Of course, Helen did not want to be left alone with Sirius, and she did not want to be disgraced at the imperial reception. Left alone, Alexander asked Roland that he wanted to discuss with him. Roland proceeded to the case and informed his brother that his father constantly emphasizes that Alexander was too tired of the URDD family and does not think about his future, so he will probably marry Alexander without consent. Alexander said dissatisfied that his father did not leave attempts to conclude some political marriage to strengthen the position of Iglis's family, and he is not going to marry the first stranger. Roland said that he was in vain hope that a representative of a well-known aristocratic family can marry love is a waste of time. Then the brother asked if Alexander had someone on the sign, hinted at the widow, Duke of Urda. Then Roland explained that then Alexander's interest would be justified by Alexander. But Alexander was angry and said that Roland immediately stopped this senseless flight of fantasy, because he did not even think about Elena in that way. Speaking, the man was red and was frightened by his reaction. Roland, of course, noticed how his brother reacted to the widow Robert and thought that he was planning something interesting, because if Alexander married the Duchess, It would undoubtedly strengthen the position of Iglis's family. And while Alexander recalled the last days near Elena, his brother snorted him on his shoulder and said that he would order a few words before his father, asking Alexander not to waste time. Leaving the room, Roland added that all women love bad guys, and Alexander copes with this role very well. The angry brother shouted that the Roland closed the pellet because he was not interested in Elena. Meanwhile, the boys played on the street. Lucius began to say that one day his mother prepared him an apple pie and it was a reward for his efforts. Then Lucius Booley added that there was so much food on the table that the end was not visible. He looked at Sirius's reaction and asked if the boy would envy him. Sirius quietly replied that yes. Lilia realized that after the loss of Sirius's parents, it was not easy, and this Lucius was constantly banging with her parents and their care. Therefore, the maid decided to save the situation. Lilia came to the boys and cheerfully told that Sirius, Mrs. Olena, had prepared a cherry pie recently. The boy shouted his eyes in the memory of this delicacy, and he told Lucius how delicious he was. Sirius added that after that, they and Elena prepared an orange jam together and baked delicious buns. Then he was smeared in the dough, and it was quite fun. Lucius knew that his mother was asking to cook all the foods, and then tells the boy that she had prepared them. But he realized that the Duchess Elena was not at all and became insulting. Then Lucius proudly put his hands on his chest and said that if Sirius refers to a red-haired woman he saw in the living room, then she did not have him. To make Sirius hurt, Lucius asked the boy if he knew that his mother died when he gave birth. Meanwhile, Elena has already coped with the lessons and hurried to the boys. Elena seemed to fly to heaven and saw two angels playing in the yard. Lucius was constantly dictating his rules, and Sirius tried to do everything according to Luzuiu's instructions. In the game, Lucius constantly embarrassed in trouble because of his ill-considered exits. Sirius, however, was standing out against his background restraint and calm character. The guy was not touched by Lucius. Elena noticed that right now Sirius behaves quite shy and did not understand what happened. His sad look also caused her some embarrassment, but the girl thought that it seemed to her. Finally, Rolana's wife arrived, and seeing her, Lucius ran to his mother, telling how they played well with Sirius and his uncle Alexander. Very soon, Alexander and Elena spent the guests to the carriage. Rolana's family said goodbye and thanked Helen for looking after their son. The girl, smiling, replied that it was a little thing. Lucius kept his dad in my mother's arms, and turning around, said Sirius with an ecotist smile that they would soon see, and asked the boy not to miss alone. Elena noticed that Sirius somehow changed after she remained alone with Lucius and did not understand what the case was. To see her boy missed her unbearable. All the time, Elena was thinking about what happened during their game. After all, changes in the mood of Sirius were very disturbed because she was worth the effort to see how the boy finally smiles. Then Elena decided to find out at the maid and asked the girl what happened to Sirius while she was engaged in etiquette lessons with William. Elena was convinced that the maid would tell her all the truth. The maid immediately remembered that the day before they were collected by a butler and warned that Elena was now engaged in preparation for the imperial score, so she should not be disturbed by different little things. Lilia decided not to force Elena once again to be nervous, so she said that just a rather active boy, so probably Sirius was difficult to get used to such a young man's temperament. Then Elena noted that if she was near Sirius at that moment, she would be able to see everything with her own eyes. Lilia immediately reminded that the Duchess was waiting for an important event for which to prepare carefully. Lilia said that by the end of the Emperor's reception, Elena had concerned her young maid and did not get distracted. Then Elena was doubtful or told her the maid all the truth. In order to cheer up Elena's maid, she suggested that she spend her day with Sirius today. Elena said that she was waiting for lessons, and Lilia assured that from one weekend it would only be better. The maid said she would discuss this idea with the butter, and Elena really improved the mood in anticipation of picnic in the open air with her small boy. When Sirius learned that they would spend today with Elena, he was so happy that he dressed in a few minutes, and here they have already found a wonderful lawn that was covered with white flowers. Taking one of them, Elena said that there were no such flowers in their garden. Sirius looked carefully at a strange flower, telling her stepmother that he sees it for the first time. At that time, Elena suggested making a wreath from these flowers, and Sirius supported this idea. The girl was able to weave wreaths skillfully, and in a few minutes the white crown flashed in the boy on her head. After playing with the flowers, Elena suggested a snack and got a pre-cooked basket. And when the boy opened and saw how many goodies he prepared Elena, he had saliva flowed. The boy was happy to eat sandwiches and praised Helen for her culinary abilities. The girl saw that the boy behaved as usual, though she felt something with him. Then Elena decided to talk to Sirius openly and asked him what had happened. The boy went down his eyes and did not understand what the language was about, and the stepmother, meanwhile, explained that he behaved not as usual. Elena looked into the eyes of a little boy and said that if he shared her problems with her, she would surely help Sirius to deal with them. Then the boy looked away and for a while just remained silent. Elena did not drive him, waiting for him to tell everything himself, and Sirius said quietly that he knew the whole truth, that his mother died through him. At first, Elena decided that the boy only guessed and asked where he took the nonsense, but Sirius told that Lucius told him that his mother died when she gave birth to Sirius. The boy began to cry and said that he did not know it, because his father constantly said that his mother died due to incurable illness. He blamed himself because of him. Both mom and father were now dead. Elena broke her heart when she heard these words of a little boy. Then Sirius, with tears in his eyes, asked the girl if he should be born at all. The girl had tears in her eyes, and she remembered this scene from the game, when Sirius learned the whole truth about the death of her mother, but not from Lucius, but from Elena herself. It was by this point that Elena played the role of a good stepmother to tie Sirius to herself, but it was at that moment that she showed her true face and said that the birth of Sirius was a mistake. In the game, Elena said that Sirius had not had to be born at all, and if he had not been, then his father and mother would have lived a long and happy life, but Sirius killed them treacherously. These words were deeply injured by a little boy, and even at the end of his life he remembered them. The girl cried that she was now in the body of a woman who led Sirius to death in her own words. In his past life, Elena Sirius was only a set of pixels that did not even exist. But when she was bad, she always included her favorite game and distracted from cruel reality. It was the presence in her phone of Sirius that gave the girl the power to live for another day, because he saved her soul many times, and without him, her life would have turned into a real hell. So now the girl said with confidence that she was happy because Sirius was born. Elena added that she was grateful for meeting the boys and for the opportunity to talk to him. She recalled that when she was hard at work or lonely, she always had Sirius, who supported her and did for her what no living man could do. Elena just dreamed of saying the boy in the eyes of these words, so taking his hand with tears in her eyes, she said that she was grateful to God for the fact that Sirius was born into the world. After these words, the boy became easier and he looked into the eyes of Elena with gratitude. He whispered that he was also happy with her, and thanked her warm words that reassured and supported him. The boy raised his head up, and looking up to the sky, thanked his mother that she gave birth to him, and Daddy, that he grew so strong. Dear became easier in the soul to see Sirius smiling again. The girl thanked the fate that she had succeeded in changing something in the present reality, because after Robert's death she was not afraid that it would be impossible to change the fate in this world. The girl thought that the boy would surely remember that he needs someone in this world and will never be alone. She promised that she would definitely protect him from a terrible future. Returning home, Helen and a little boy discussed the future dinner and planned that they would prepare today. The girl realized that they were late and already late. Walking through the forest path, the girl heard some stranger and stopped. Sirius instinctively hid for his stepmother and looked with her from behind. Suddenly, a magical monster ran out of the tree, which opened its mouth and prepared for the attack. Elena could not understand what the monster was doing here because Robert had them to seal them forever. Sirius asked Elena what to do because he was very scared. The only thing that was thought to the girl is what they should run away. So she shouted that Sirius did not fall behind and ran from the monster. Elena expected that the duchy remained quite near and she would have time to call for help. But suddenly Sirius caught on the root of the tree and fell to the ground, releasing Helen's hand. Elena stopped and saw that the boy remained a few meters, so she knew clearly that the monster would now pour on Sirius. She courageously faced a magical monster, covering the boy. She was so scared that she closed her eyes and prayed that the monster, taking her life, left Sirius from the living. All her life has swept before her eyes, and she heard some sound and an animal. Sleeping her eyes, she saw a magical monster squeezed from the fact that his whole body was burning with a bright flame. Elena began to analyze who could kill her. Suddenly, Alexander came to a young girl. Alexander said that he attacked the monster with the help of the magic of fire when he saw that the animal was going to attack them. Suddenly, the beast stood up and fled into the forest, although her body was burning with fire. Elena and Alexander sat down to the little boy and asked how he feels and whether he could move on his own. Alexander noted that the monster was no longer a veil, and so it would get it a little later. Elena asked Alexander how he found himself here, and he explained that his duty to defend her and a little guy, so when he noticed their absence, he went in search. Elena thanked Alexander for the salvation, because she realized that because of this carelessness, she could have been dangerous not only her life, but also the life of the URD family. The girl asked again how Sirius feels, and he answered that everything was fine with him. Then Alexander said that it is time to go to the duchy, because only there they can feel fully safe. When Alexander and Sirius had already started to go, Elena could not climb on her feet because she did not feel them. She did not understand what had happened and had no strength to rise. Alexander at this time returned and asked why she was not going. The maid Lilia was constantly spinning near her lady and asking how she was feeling. Elena did not understand how it happened that her legs were refused. Lilia reported that the doctor attributed her not to climb her bed. The maid said that it was not surprising, because Elena probably was very scared of the appearance of a magic monster, and she understands her perfectly, because she would not know how to behave in such a situation. On that day, Alexander approached Elena and asked dissatisfied how she could not rise. He was annoyed that the magical monster is still alive, and he should bother with this fool. But Elena calmly explained that she probably spent all her strength when she fled from the monster, and if she did not want to, but she could not rise. Sirius was sitting near the girl and listening carefully to the conversation of adults. Elena didn't know how it turned out, but she couldn't do anything with it. She began to analyze that the monster was still alive, and therefore Sirius is potentially in danger. Therefore, she decided that she should first save the boy, and asked Alexander to take Sirius into the estate and not worry about her. She knew that with a man who owns magic, the boy would be safe. Alexander asked if she really decided to stay here. Elena explained that as soon as he got to the duchy, he will immediately follow her knights, because the main thing now is to take care of Sirius. Alexander started shouting, asking what she thinks at all, because she has no strength to even get up, and if the monster returns, then it is no point in sending some knights here. The boy also began to cry and say that he would not leave her here. After all, he wants to return to the estate altogether. It was unbearable to look at all this lacrimal melodrama. The man was doomed that he had no other choice, so he picked up Elena to his arms and carried. The girl asked what he was doing, and Alexander, blushing, replied that she would help her get to the estate. The boy jumped with joy, and picking up the basket with Igea, jumped in front. For the first time in her life, Elena kept in her arms like a princess, and she was not on her own. Both young people felt uncomfortable, and Elena apologized to the fact that she was probably a traffic for Alexander. He nervously replied that she probably hinted that he is weakened to carry a woman in her arms. Elena was in a hurry to justify that she did not mean it at all, but the fact that a man had no such status to bear it. Alexander angrily replied that the status was here to nothing, because his duty to take care of their safety. Elena thought that despite the fact that Alexander was quite rude, and when it comes to her safety, he immediately came to the rescue. Thinking about it, she smiled for what she also got a remark on his part. The maid started talking about Alexander, and Elena, blushing, replied that he had no choice, because he had somehow to deliver it to a safe place, that's all. Lilia began to smile, and Elena wondered if Alexander was married at all, and if not, whether he had a bride. Because this case can be problems. Suddenly the door to the room opened. Alexander and Sirius came to Elena, and the maid hurried to leave the room, leaving them alone. The boy ran to Elena and pulled out a bouquet of blue flowers, which he gave her for faster recovery. It was so nice that Elena asked if they were really intended for her. The boy, smiling, explained that Helen thought would be a pleasure to receive such a gift. It was at this point that she remembered how Alexander was getting cold when she decided to stay in the woods, and realized that if something happened to her, Sirius would have plunged into darkness, and Alexander also understood it. The girl realized that from now on she is responsible not only for the life of Sirius, but also for her own. Elena gently stroked the boy on her head and thanked for such a gift, saying that she is extremely pleasant. Then Elena appealed to Alexander and apologized for bringing him so much trouble and thanked him that he was in such a responsible time and saved them. Elena then asked Alexander in a serious voice how demonic beasts could be on the outskirts of the duchy, when Robert had to seal them forever in a safe place. Alexander replied that he himself did not understand how it happened, but he has already reported about this case to the imperial palace, so they would soon be investigating this incident. Elena knew that the events in the game, where all the empire would face the attack of demonic animals, would only happen in 10 years, so she did not understand why it happened right now. Alexander said that he was not sure that they were faced with a representative of demonic animals because it could also be a new kind of wolves, which did not possess magical power, so the final conclusions are too early.